Have you ever wanted to discover what's missing in your life? Metaphysics is available to all and is part of your life even if you don't know it. Welcome to Metaphysics, a view through the veil with Barb Crowley. Together we'll explore the mysteries behind metaphysics and how to use it to have a deeper understanding and advantage in life. And now here's your host, Barb Crowley.
Hi, this is Barb Crowley, and welcome to Metaphysics, A View Through the Veil. Today we're talking to Christopher Jones. Christopher is a master hand reader, but I was just talking to him about his extensive education. His undergraduate studies in sociology and psychology inform much of his approach to hand reading, as does his study of astrology and esoteric Buddhism. He completed his academic studies at Oxford University with a master's degree in philosophy and theology. Obviously, you're an active researcher. I mean, that has got to be at your soul. But how did you get from all of that to hand reading? Want to tell me your story?
Actually, it's the other way around. How did I came from hand reading to that? Because I actually I came across hand reading when I was 20 years of age. Um, in fact, that's when I was studying at the University of East Anglia, where I was studying social sciences, sociology, and psychology. And of course, that begins a kind of quest to understand yourself and to understand who you are and where you come from. And so that was kind of very much part of what I was doing. And Norwich at that time was kind of very alternative community. There was lots of yoga happening. There were Buddhist groups and meditation. People were doing vegetarianism and all these radical new things like shiatsu was completely new and acupuncture. Nobody heard of that stuff in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
And I kind of got involved with the community there in Norwich, and that's when I first started doing yoga. I actually became a yoga teacher. I was a yoga teacher for 15 years. Um, but the woman who first taught me yoga was also an astrologer and also a hand reader. And she sort of said, "Oh, you might be interested in this." And so she did my birth chart for me. And then she said, "I'm doing a course next term on hand reading. Come along if you like." So I did. And basically, it was life changing. I think that's the simplest way to explain the effect of that. Because as a young man, sort of trying to find my way in the world, I was trying to work out who am I, what am I going to do in my life, what's it all about. I
Right.
think it's a very common question, and I think it's an essential question for anybody under 25 to be asking themselves.
Mhm.
And what astounded me was that all the questions about my identity and all the questions about discovering who I was, all the answers to those questions were actually there in my hands. And it was
Yeah.
like, that is extraordinary. And there were two things in particular that struck me, and the most notable of which was the fingerprint patterns. So that kind of started me on a course to try and understand how and why the fingerprint patterns can show your personality or show things about who you are, because it was quite apparent from having doing that course and having had a hand reading by the top hand reader in the UK at that time, who described those fingerprint patterns and basically, described my character and personality so accurately. It was like this is extraordinary. And that kind of inspired me so much that I actually then went on to become a hand reader. I joined. This was the Chirological Society. There was a society in the United Kingdom that was set up in 1975,
Mhm.
and they ran courses, and I did all the diplomas in that. I became the secretary of that organization. I ran it for 10 years, and from 1988 till 1999. And basically, that's kind of just dedicated all my life to doing that. And in the process of that, um, I had the opportunity to go to Oxford University. So I went to Oxford University in 1986 and did my degree in philosophy and theology at Oxford, 86 to 89. And then after that, I thought, well, I've been doing hand reading for, what, 7 years now.
Mhm.
Let's give it a go. So I became a full-time hand reader from 1989 onwards, and that was kind of right through till I came to New Zealand, which was in 2000. But so that was kind of a very formative part of my life experience. And in that process, because as you rightly observed, I am a bit of a researcher. That's very true.
A
You can
bit.
probably see the you can probably see the books behind me. Those are all hand reading books, by the way.
Yeah.
Um, And I was very fortunate to, as a student at Oxford University, the libraries at Oxford University are absolutely extraordinary. I
Mhm.
mean, the libraries themselves were founded in like the 15th and 16th centuries, so and they've got books there that go back hundreds of years, even further than that. So one of the things I realized was that because it's a copyright library, every book that's published in the United Kingdom has to be put into that library.
Oh,
And
really?
that, of course, includes every book on palmistry and every book on hand reading and every book on fingerprints and every book on dermatoglyphics. And so I thought, great, I shall go and read all the books then. So I did. So one of the big projects I undertook in the early 1990s, well, I did two huge projects at the library. I did one which was to go back over the history of handreading, and I basically tracked the history of handreading back to 1160, back to the 12th century. So the oldest known text on handreading in European languages dates from 1160. So that was a huge,
I have
big
to ask
swathe of
here,
work that
though,
I
it
did.
had to start before that. So the first written text is
Yeah,
1160.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, there are antecedents to that, and there are lots of mentions of it. But in the European tradition, the oldest text that still exists, the
right.
earliest chiromancy in the West, as they call it, the
Hmm.
Edwine Psalter, was dates from 1160. I actually just recently did a video about that on my YouTube channel. So if people want to find out more about that particular
And
manuscript and what it
what's your
contains,
YouTube channel? What's your YouTube channel?
Master Hand Reader. Yeah,
Okay.
Master Hand Reader on YouTube. You just go there to
Okay.
YouTube and look up Master Hand Reader,
Okay.
and you'll
And for
find me there.
those of us who need a New York accent, master hand reader.
Master Hand Reader. Yeah,
Master
exactly.
hand reader.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because I missed it when you were saying it. It's like,
I'll try and adjust my accent then. I
yeah,
was born
no,
in
you
London.
don't need to. I'll interpret.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the second project I did was a project researching the fingerprint patterns. And the fingerprint patterns, obviously, as I mentioned, they're incredibly important from the point of view of diagnosing people psychologically. But there's a lot of medical literature about the fingerprint patterns, genetic significance of fingerprint patterns, the health significance of fingerprint patterns. There's about 120 years research into the medical implications of fingerprint patterns dating back to about 1901.
Hmm.
And again, all that material is in the Bodleian Library as well at Oxford University. And I researched all that, and the end result of that was a book called The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, which I wrote actually in 1991. So the book that's kind of coming out in January by that title, Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, is actually something I actually wrote in 1991, 1992. And I wrote it because it was a study text for my students. So it was privately published. I probably made about 100 copies of it, something like that. And people who were studying with me at that time were fortunate enough to get a copy of it. They got the benefits of all of that. And one of
Right.
the kind of consequences of that is that some of the world's most famous hand readers who are really well known all around the world, they all studied with me in the early 1990s. They had that book
Wow.
back then, and
Yeah.
they've used that book as the sort of backbone of their practice as hand readers over the last 30 years. So it's timely that this book's coming out now, but it's not only it's not only a kind of a revised and updated edition of the book, it's also a body of knowledge that stood a test of time and has actually been road tested. When you've got half a dozen people who are professional hand readers who've been reading hands for 30 years and they've been using that book as their reference book, you know,
Wow.
and they're
That's
and they're
quite the
still jumping up and
compliment.
down with
Yeah.
excitement about it.
But let me
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
you,
exactly.
what has changed from 1160 to now? Has it been quite a bit of changed opinions on what the hand is saying, or has it been consistent?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important to understand that the approach that people take to hand reading is very much dependent upon their worldview.
Hmm.
So, modern hand reading is very focused upon psychology and personality. We live at a time where people want to understand themselves, want to understand what their motivations are, want to make healthy choices about their relationships, want to make informed choices about their career. That kind of self-awareness is very much a product of a 20th century mentality, which follows on from people like Freud and Jung and the psychological movements and psychoanalysis and stuff. So that's kind of very much a contemporary approach, and that's how we look
Mhm.
at handreading now and the significance and importance of handreading. But if you go back historically, and I'm only going to speak about the European traditions and the North American traditions because that's what I know most
And
about.
that's the library you have.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's quite enough. I mean, I agree with you. There are antecedents in China, there are antecedents in India, but we really
Mhm.
don't know very much about what they were said about the hand 3,000 years ago. We know that they looked at hands. There are references in the Bible, there are references in the Veda, there are references in Buddhist texts, in sutras. So we know that there are, but they just say things like, you know, you can see the sign of a Buddha in the hand. They don't tell you what that
Right.
is, or they don't explain anything like that. They just, we know that they were looking at them. That's all we know. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, he writes about the lines of the hand in a book that he wrote in 345 BC, but he doesn't say anything about it. He just says, why are there lines in the hand? So he's noticed them, but he doesn't sort of give them any significance or interpret them. He doesn't know. He's not a hand reader. He's a scientist.
Mhm. I'm
So if you
surprised
go,
everybody wasn't a hand reader then.
well, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard to say that for sure because we just don't know how extensive it was. What we
Hmm.
do know is that hand reading was very much tied up with astrology in the Renaissance period, but it wasn't always associated with astrology. So there are four distinct. I just think there's four distinct periods of hand reading. So there's the modern period,
Hmm.
then there's the Victorian revival period, which kind of really from about 1840 to about 1910, when you
Wasn't
have
that a
very famous
spiritualist
palmists like
time period?
Cairo and William Benham. So what was that?
Wasn't that a spiritualist time period?
Yes,
Spiritualism was
exactly.
very big.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's very much an occult approach to hand reading
Hmm.
because you've got Madame Blavatsky, you've got all the seances, you've got the manifesting mediums, or no, you've got
Right.
all those
Right.
kind of people. So that's very much the climate that's of the 19th century revival of hand reading.
Hmm.
So their approach is to look at hand reading from that kind of perspective. And so they're looking for messages essentially, basically. That's what they're looking for. Does
Right.
the hand tell us any message? But they've also got a proto-psychological approach because at the same time as you have the sort of psychic emphasis in certain circles, you've also got the rise of science. So there are people trying to look at the physiognomy of the hand, the shape and structure of the hand, and say, well, that's what tells us about their personality. So
Hmm.
as a product of that, interest also came things like phrenology, looking at the bumps on the head as well. They were
Oh
trying
yeah.
to
Yeah.
understand the psychology of the human being from the physical form of the body. And you have to remember that the unconscious hadn't been invented yet. Freud hadn't discovered it. Nobody knew what dreams meant. And I mean, the interpretation of dreams book that Freud wrote was published in 1899.
Hmm.
So he wasn't right. That wasn't something that people knew about. So they were looking. They have quite a magical viewpoint. The 19th century palmists. The Renaissance palmists, which is about 1450 to about 1650, they're astrologers. They see hand reading as a sort of a subset of astrology, and their approach is really interesting too because I mean they're following the edict as above, so below. They're kind of doing this macrocosmic, microcosmic interreflection. You've got Paracelsus, you've got Robert Flood, you've got esotericists like that. Plus, you've got sort of more urbane hand readers, people like Richard Saunders and George Warnton, who are friends with people like Nicholas Culpeper and William Lilly. William Lilly is the most famous 17th century astrologer in the UK.
Hmm.
And they're all friends together, and they're working with hand reading as a part of astrology. So if you studied hand reading, then you studied astrology. In fact, what's really interesting, if you read those books, the reason why they studied hand reading was because they didn't know what people's birth charts were.
Oh,
Because
that's
in the
right.
seven,
Yeah.
because in the 17th century, nobody had a clock.
Yeah.
Nobody knew what the
Yeah.
time was. Nobody
Did they
they didn't
even
have
keep?
calendars.
Did they even keep
And
dates? I mean,
no,
people.
exactly. So people
Yeah.
didn't know what date. Some people didn't even know what year they were born. They just,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
wasn't recorded. And so what they would do was, well, we don't know what your birth chart is. So let's have a look at your hand and try and work out your birth chart from your hand. And so
Oh
you
wow.
get this. This is I mean, I don't think it works. I mean, I am an astrologer as well.
That was
I
my
mean,
next question. Could they
yeah,
do
no, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. But you could see that's
yeah.
why they were trying to do it. And you can read their books and and they've got all these really strange theories about the meaning of the headline ending on the mount of the moon,
Mhm.
with a cross on it. This is my favorite example from Richard Saunders. So the headline, they say, well, that's ruled by Mercury. And so that means you're Gemini, looking at that, because it ends on the mount of the moon. So you were born on a Monday, because the moon rules
Wow.
Monday. And the X, well, that's the Roman number for 10. So that means you were born on the 10th of June. That's your
Yeah.
birthday. So they would like literally on a Monday. So that's what they would do. They would try and
They
work
could
out
never
what the
be
chart.
proven wrong.
No, they could have. Exactly, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's a bit circular. But anyway, that was their approach because they were astrologers. So,
Hmm.
and people always think that hand reading and astrology are completely linked together, and they're not. They really aren't. They are two completely different disciplines. And the only reason they have some overlap is because the astrologers were applying their astrology principles to the hand to try and understand
Hmm.
hand reading in a very specific period between 1450 and 1660. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
literally 200 years. And then before that, to go back to answer your question, I'm sorry,
Hmm.
the long answer to your question, but you did
No,
ask
it's
a short
good.
question.
Yeah.
Short questions always have long
Fascinating,
answers.
actually. Yeah.
Going to and before 1450, what's interesting is that there is no mention of astrology in the hand at all. They don't talk about astrology. They don't talk about planets. They don't talk about the mounts. They don't talk about astrological influences. What they talk about is the hand showing the marks of God,
Yeah.
because this is early medieval Europe. The
Hmm.
Roman Catholic Church is the dominant intellectual force in Europe and dominates the way that people think. That's the whole point of the Renaissance. The Renaissance comes along in the middle of the 15th century and starts liberating academic thought from the constraints of the church. So
Hmm.
in those there, what they're looking for are marks of God. So the big thing they look for is what they call the Great Triangle. So if you have a big triangle formed in the hand, what that means is you're blessed by God, because of course the Great Triangle is the Holy Trinity: God
Yeah.
the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. And
Hmm.
so that idea that the triangle is important in the hand is still taught in palmistry. It's not true, it's not relevant, it's not significant in any way. It's looking for shapes, and what they're looking for is the shape of the triangle, because the triangle is a very powerful symbol to the early medieval mind, because it's a symbol of Christianity. So if you've got a big triangle in your hand, it means you're blessed by God, and your life is going to be fortunate. However, if you've got a cross
Hmm.
on your hand anywhere, well, that's not good, because Jesus died on the cross.
Oh.
So crosses are a mark of your death. So you don't want to. So if you had a cross on the Mount of the Moon, that means you would die in the sea. If you had a cross on the Mount of Mars, or this area here, you would die a battle. So they were very preoccupied with death. So they look for those two. They look for those natural Christian symbols in the hand. So they're looking. They've got their Christian ideology. They're looking at the hand for those symbols. So
Hmm.
do those things mean that, or are they just a function of that perception? And I would argue the latter, because we
Right.
don't we don't consider the triangle to be important now. We don't consider the crosses to be important now. They are looking for what you call signs and symbols in the hand. And Indian palmistry and Chinese palmistry is quite similar in that, from that time is quite similar, because in Chinese palmistry they look for trigrams like in the I Ching. They look for like marks that look like the I Ching trigrams.
Hmm.
And in Indian palmistry, they look for conches and shells and umbrellas and elephants. If you've got an elephant mark in your hand, or the sign of the fish, it shows you're very lucky and blessed, and so on and so forth. So there's this notion of looking for signs and symbols as the approach, and there's no systematic
Did they
analysis
ever look
of the hand.
medically in the hands at all? There was no medical
Yeah, yeah,
evidence.
yes, absolutely. That's a much more modern phenomena.
Hmm.
So emerging in the
But
19th
at that
century, we have
time, they were all just
no, no, not
religious.
no, 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 not back then. No, I mean they did. I mean, they kind of did, but they didn't really understand medicine. So, I mean, they
Yeah.
they call this on the line of the liver. So like if this line was strong, it showed your liver was in poor condition. They called this the table line.
Mhm.
Um, what they call the heart line, they call it the table line. That was very important from a gynecological and reproductive point of view, according to medieval chiromancers. So if this table line went up between the two fingers, what that showed was a woman would die in childbirth.
No, geez.
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't mean that, but I mean, that's what they were saying because that's what they
Yeah.
were interested in. I mean, and this is where the whole notion of looking for numbers of babies come from as well, because you have to remember that in that period of time, life expectancy was 30 years. Life was nasty, brutish, and short. And if life expectancy was 30 years, that meant as a young woman, as soon as you menstruated, you would have to start reproduction. Let's
Right.
say that happens at 14, only got another 15, 16 years before you've got to
Yeah.
reproduce the
And that
generations,
would
which
probably
is
be
why
before.
which is why
Yeah.
children were married at age 12 and 14, because, you wouldn't, once a girl menstruated, she was no longer a child. She was a woman. She was of reproductive age and had to go and reproduce. And economically, of course, a woman's value in those days was
Mm-hmm.
only significant in as much as she could reproduce and how many children she could reproduce and how many boys she could reproduce, particularly.
Right.
And so that's why they were concerned to look in the hands of women to see how many babies they're going to make.
Before they
Nothing to
marry?
do with the hand at all, but to do
Yeah.
with the sociology of that time. So
Would
I
they
think
do that
to kind of
before they
answer your
married?
question, sorry?
Would they do that before they married? Before
I
they
don't know if it really
child?
mattered.
Yeah.
That's what they were concerned about. I mean, it's like it's part of what you want to do. You want to say, well, this is a fertile young woman. She's going to produce five babies, and and three of those will be sons. You know, what kind of mentality is that? That's not something that we can
Well,
resonate
it's
with
like a
at all.
breeder. You're a breeder. It's a
Yeah,
breeder
yeah,
mentality.
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, they
So
pick
when
their cattle the same way, not with palmistry.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this is what's interesting to me. So most people think that hand reading is about prediction and how you're going to die, how long you're going to live,
Right.
how many babies you're going to have, are you going to get married? That's all the preoccupations of 15th century palmists.
Mm-hmm.
That's so that view that hand reading's about that is literally 500 years out of date. And my book, The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, is basically saying we need to update that viewpoint. We're
Yeah.
looking at it the wrong way. That's not relevant. We're not living in feudal Europe. We're not living under the yoke of Roman Catholic dispositions. We're not constrained by the economic conditions. We are more enlightened. We're more aware. We have more choices. We have more opportunity. And so hand reading becomes, in modern times, is about looking at, well, let's develop that self-awareness. Let's develop that understanding of who we are, and let's try and create the opportunities for us to express ourselves and live a fulfilling life. We are not slaves, or we don't have to be slaves to an economic system. We actually have an
Mhm.
ability to be a joyful expression of the divinity that flows through all of us, and
Right.
but what is that? How do we do that? Well, that's the question that I think hand reading can answer. And that
But
was
what
my
does
experience in
triangle mean
1983.
now? What does a triangle mean now?
Doesn't mean anything. It's
Oh,
irrelevant. It's
okay.
complete nonsense. I mean, that's the
Oh,
point. It's complete nonsense. It's not even like interesting, except historically. What
yeah.
it tells us is about how they thought about it in the
Yeah.
13th century.
Oh, right.
And it tells us about the life of people in the 13th century. It doesn't tell us anything about the hand.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
very important for people to remember that these are perspectives, and this understanding is coming because of the Catholic Church, because
Right.
of feudal economic system. The Renaissance thing with the astrology, that's not true. That's just the way they saw it in the
Yeah. Yeah.
16th century, in the 17th century. Same with the occultism and the spiritualism of the 19th century. Kind of that's not true either. And probably in 100 years' time, people are saying, well, that Christopher Jones person talking about the genetics of fingerprints, that's just not true. That's just how they saw it at that time.
But how
I
do
mean,
we
I'm
know
perfectly
that
at
we're
liberty to
true?
say that.
But how do we know that ours is true? Because every period.
Because we have an empiric basis for things. That's the point. And
Okay.
that's why the
Yeah.
medical dermatoglyphic studies are really, really important.
So tell
So
me about
so if we
those.
go let's jump 500 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go to the 20th century. Let's update ourselves a little bit.
Okay.
Um, so so okay, so fingerprints, right? You know about fingerprints, yeah?
No, I don't. Most people will talk about hand reading and not fingerprints. So no,
Well, then they are outdated by 125 years in that
I'll
case,
have
all
to
right? So
tell them.
If you look at all the palmistry literature that I've just mentioned over that kind of 600 year period, there
Yeah.
is no mention of fingerprint patterns at all in
Uh-huh.
any of the palmistry literature, even in the Victorian times. Now that's what's interesting, is because it's in the Victorian times that people discover the significance of fingerprint patterns. They are first classified in 1823. Then there's a guy called Francis Galton who comes in the 1890s, and he's the one who classifies fingerprints as whorls, loops, and arches. And within 10 years of his book being published, the book on fingerprints, the police forces of the United Kingdom are using them for identification purposes. So the thing that happens in that time is two things. First of all, they recognize that there are seven main fingerprint pattern types, and they recognize that they're unique to every single individual. So this is a fact that we know. The
Right.
fingerprint patterns are unique. Everyone's using them these days to open their phones or to, going through passport control with taking handprints and stuff. So we all know that there are biometric markers of our individuality, and the most significant of those is the fingerprint pattern. So that's the first thing. And the second thing that Galton established, which was kind of really key, is that the fingerprint patterns don't change over time.
Okay,
So
I
they
have
remain
to ask you,
permanent.
how about when I mean, we all burn our fingers. We all do.
Yeah, you could if you put your fingers in carbolic acid or sulfuric acid and burnt your fingers off, or if your hand was burnt in a fire, the
Mhm.
skin would get irreversibly damaged. But that's a very extreme. Other than that, the fingerprint patterns are immutable. They don't change. They can fade away a little
Now
bit,
I
but
have
they
to
don't go
say,
away.
so to get into my computer, I use my fingerprints, right, to get in. But then I picked up a hot pot. And I haven't been able to get in using that finger since really,
Yeah, so
yeah,
you've scarred the tissue on your fingerprint, but
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
not changed the finger that's not
Oh, it
changed the
does not
fingerprint
change
pattern.
the
That's
fingerprint.
scarred your skin. Your skin is
Okay,
scarred. Like if you scar yourself anywhere, if you scar yourself on your arm, that
right.
skin of the scar is different from the rest of your skin. It's
Okay,
scar tissue. It's not skin. It's not skin. It's scar tissue. So
gotcha.
so
Yeah.
right? And also you're older, and the human skin gets thinner as we get older.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
that's an aging thing, but it's harder to see the fingerprint patterns on people over the age of about 65.
Oh, really?
But
Yeah.
they're still there. You just need stronger light and a bigger magnifying glass, that's all. But they don't change. So they don't change over time. And it must be true that they don't change over time, because if they did change over time, they would be absolutely no use to the police forces. They wouldn't be able to be used for identification purposes. So
But
there's two
sometimes
things
they
that
will go on using things that later we'll find out they had no use for. They were not, they had grown past that, but they'll still use it. You know what I mean? I don't have
yeah, well,
much faith as you do
in
in
what?
that they won't use outdated information and just use it like it's, you know.
Well, they do. That's exactly my point about palmistry. Every palmist out there, apart from probably about 20 people that I personally know,
Mhm.
uses the occult palmistry of Victorian times or the Renaissance palmistry of the 17th century. And they do
Right.
not use fingerprint patterns. So why my book is so revolutionary is it says, let's put fingerprints at the front and center of what we're doing. And why are we doing that? Well, the lines of the hands change over time. The shape and form of the hand changes as we grow from childhood into adulthood.
Mhm.
But the fingerprints never change throughout our entire lives. So the fingerprint patterns form in the womb around the 16th to 20th week of gestation. By the time the fetus is 4 months of fetal life, the fingerprints are forming on the fingers already. And they don't change throughout your entire life. So this was the kind of the key thing that Francis Galton established in the 19th century was the fingerprint patterns are unique to each individual, and they don't change over time. And that's why they can be used for identification purposes. So they were adopted by police forces from 1901. Scotland Yard in the
Yeah.
UK was the first. And of course, now it's worldwide that they're used for identification purposes.
Mhm.
And what came out of that was the uh, Galton was very interested. He was a cousin of Charles Darwin, so he was very interested in evolutionary biology, and so they were very interested in genetics at that time. So this spawned, 100 years of research into the genetic significance of fingerprint patterns. So the second research project I did at the Oxford University Libraries was to look at all the medical and dramatic literature, medical genetic literature on fingerprint patterns.
Mhm.
Because when you've got people studying heart disease, cancer, leukemia, intestinal disorders,
Right.
Alzheimer's disease, Down syndrome, genetic disorders like that, and they're finding correlations between the fingerprint patterns and the lines of the hand that show those diseases, you've actually got an empiric basis by which you can understand the significance of the hand. So that you ask, what's the difference between now and hand reading in the 12th century?
Mhm.
Well, in the 12th century, nobody was doing science. Nobody was replicating any particular discovery, so they weren't testing massive samples of people to see if the triangle did in fact mean you were
Right.
blessed by God. They didn't have a system to do that. But
Yeah.
now we can say, well, there's a line formation. Normally you have two transverse lines across your hand, but there's a line formation called uh, the four-finger crease, or sometimes called the simian line, where there's one line across that hand, which is
Uh-huh.
incredibly rare in the general population, about 1 to 2% of people in the general population, but is incredibly common in the rare chromosomal disorders like trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome. So in
Wow.
hands of Down syndrome, 55% of people with Down syndrome have this single transverse crease, which is almost never seen in non-Down syndrome people. So what we know from that's medical literature. That's medical
Mhm.
science has shown this line formation shows a, a mutation of the 21st chromosome that causes this condition we call Down syndrome. And what palmistry have always said, like I said, this is the Mercury line. So this line is to do with your thinking and to do with your head and to do with how you understand things. And of
Right.
course, one thing we do know about people with Down syndrome is they are cognitively challenged. They are born with a congenital cognitive deficiency. And what line on the hand is problematic? What line is deficient in that hand? The line that's to do with thinking. So this is like hand readers have been saying this line is to do with thinking for hundreds of years, and then medical science comes along, doesn't read the palmistry literature, and discovers that this line is deficient in the people who are born with cognitive deficiency. And it's like, so we suddenly have, you know, a huge swathe of medical literature. It published in the Journal of American, Medicine, British Medical Journal. I mean, serious
Mhm.
journals, not just fringy stuff at all,
Scientific
going all through the
journals.
30s
Yeah.
and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And
Hmm.
I studied all that material, and I compiled the most useful parts of that information. And that's a chapter in my book, The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, on the medical and genetic significance of fingerprints, because that underpins the approach that I take psychologically, because it gives us an evidential basis to say these are, first of all, it says these patterns are significant. But it also gives us saying we know that they're significant from a genetic point of view.
Right.
Now, human beings are complicated, and how does consciousness arise? There are obviously different theories according to how you view the world, but at least part of it is genetic. And when we talk about genetics, what we're really talking about is in inherited characteristics.
Hmm.
So everybody knows, oh,
Inherited
you're a bit like
propensity,
you,
or is it a
yeah,
guarantee?
exactly. Yep, exactly. So you're like your mum and you're like your dad in
Yeah.
some way, because you're a product of the fusion of those two people. I mean, and you're also different,
Mhm.
and so we all know this. We know that we're similar in some ways to one or other, or sometimes a
Right.
mixture of our parents. And we all so there's that's the genetic component, if you like, and then there's the nurture. So by virtue of the values of our parents, that brings that kind of comes across in our hands as well. And
Hmm.
then of course then there's what I call the je ne sais quoi, the sort of the unknown factor. So I think we're kind of made up of three things, the genetic, there's nature, there's nurture, and then there's the something else, the spirit, if you like, karma, if you want,
Yeah.
whatever,
Well,
however you want to describe that, it's
yeah.
whatever it is on the other side of the veil. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
it's kind of like we're a mix of those things. But what's interesting about the hand is you can see exactly that. All right. So if you compare the hands of parents with their children, you
Hmm.
can see what characteristics they've inherited from their parents. So fingerprint
And will they
patterns,
get that cancer?
and will they get that cancer?
Right.
Exactly. So fingerprint patterns, for example, are genetic, right?
Hmm.
So because they're genetic, they run in families. So you get the same pattern types running down in families. What's the first question your doctor asks you? He says, what family diseases have you had? What did your parents die of?
Right.
That's a really important question. If you want to understand the most likelihood thing that you're going to die of, look at the history of your family,
Mm-hmm.
because you will inherit those weaknesses, or you may inherit those weaknesses, or you've got a disposition to those things. And so this is what's interesting about the fingerprints. We know from the fingerprint patterns what kind of diseases someone's going to get, for example, because we know the propensity. Now, knowing that doesn't mean you're definitely going to get that,
That's
but
what I'm asking. Yeah.
knowing that does mean that you can take steps in your life to make your life, improve your life, so you're going to lessen the chances of getting that. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So, for example, I've got world fingerprint patterns, and world fingerprint patterns are associated with heart disease, cardiovascular failure, and heart attacks. So, and I'm 63 now, but I've had two heart attacks. So kind of like, and so when they happened, I
Ooh.
went, oh yeah, that's kind of what I expected. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
well, that's the other
quite
thing I
that's quite
wanted to ask. Is it setting you up to expect it? Or are you bringing it
no, no,
on?
no, no. It's setting me up to know that I need to be very careful about how I lead my life. So at that time, I wasn't paying much attention to my. I was very stressed. I was overworking. I was doing 70, 80-hour weeks. I was
Right.
smoking, and I wasn't doing any exercise. So if you know you've got a propensity to that, then you go, well, I'm going to reduce the stress. I'm not going to smoke, and I'm going to do some exercise. I'm going to eat
Right.
healthier,
Right.
and then I'm taking away the factors that will make it more likely to me to have a heart disease. So
Now,
you
could
look
you
at that,
see it in your family? Could you see it in your ancestry, the heart?
Yeah, yeah. My father had that was his problem, and my grandfather died of a stroke. So strokes and heart
Right.
disease, sudden cardiovascular events like
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
associated with wells. So 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 this is the point. This is knowledge. And to be forearmed, to be forewarned is to be forearmed. Basically, if you got that kind of knowledge, you
Sometimes,
know that
sometimes
disposition.
it's just a horror. Sometimes you're watching something come at you and there really is nothing you can do about it.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the first thing you can do from the hand is you can see which bits are a product of your genetics. The second thing in the hand is what features of the hand are to do with your life experience.
Hmm.
Like you can see, because you can see childhood trauma in the hand, you can see education experiences in the hand, you can see certain things that have happened to people kind of record in the hand. There's this whole notion today of like the body knows the score. Well, the
Right.
hand is kind of like a record of what has happened to you. It
Hmm.
doesn't show you what is going to happen to you
Yeah.
because it hasn't happened yet. But it does seem to record particularly traumatic events in our lives. They tend to be they tend to show up in the hand. So
In
you
the
can see
hand or
those
in the
things.
fingerprints?
Say that again.
In the hand or in the fingerprints?
Well, the fingerprints are part of the
Yeah.
hand. The
Yeah.
fingerprints are the genetic component. The lines of the hand tend to show our experiences, but the fingers can show that too. It's I mean, kind of complicated to say which bits belong to where, but if you take the hand as a whole, anything from the wrist down is important as far as I'm concerned. So,
Yeah.
but the fingerprint patterns, so certain things, the certain other features show on our nurture, the kind of experience we've had, and then there's also the other bits that don't fit either with experiences or don't fit with the inheritance from the parents, and that's the je ne sais quoi. So it's kind of what's really interesting in the hand is you get to see to what degree you're like your parents, to what degree you're affected by your experiences in life, and to what degree you are different by virtue of the spirit that inhabits you, that comes through you, that is expressing itself through the
Right.
physical form of your body. And so you kind of get this nice, interesting mixture of all those three, and it's actually quite an interesting piece of detective work to try and do that.
Now, on the
But in
fingertips, can you see, let's say, if somebody's being born into a brutal family, an abusive family, a cruel family, is that propensity, not only them being born, but that runs through families, that cruelty?
Yeah,
Can
yeah,
you see
yeah, yeah. No,
that?
that's one of the things that yes, absolutely. That's one of the things I think is really important to notice. So that's kind of function of the two different hands, right? So people always ask, what's the difference between the two hands? Well, your dominant, if you're right-handed, then your right hand is your dominant hand. The dominant hand is you do everything, you throw a ball
Right.
with it, you hit it, you play tennis with it, you write with it. The dominant hand is you expressing yourself in the world. It's
Hmm.
what, it's when you're directing yourself out to the world, people predominantly use their dominant hand, their active hand. So the active hand is a good descriptor of the way in which we interact with the external environment and what we do with our life. If I'm going to work out what job someone should be doing in their life, I will look at their active hand. The active hand will show the patterns, that their skill sets, their abilities in particular areas of life, and their interests. And so, what kind of things that they will actually do in their life. I mean, it's a test that we do in the International Handreading Association. We have an exam system, and two of my students have just passed their exam. And part of the question was work out what this person does for a job, And if you and even new students, even if they've only been doing it for a year, can actually work that out from the hand. They can work out. They may not work it out specifically. I mean, like this woman worked out that he was a horticulturist and a farmer and worked on the land and worked with plants in some kind of way. And he's actually runs a tree planting business. So she kind
Right.
of like got the
That's
right
still
area.
pretty good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
she's only been doing it for a year. So it's like you can work that the active hand shows what the person does in the world. The
And is
passive
it
hand,
after the fact, or couldn't you see before, let's say when
oh,
they're
you
15,
can see
before
that
they
before.
come
You can
in?
see that before
Yeah,
because certain features of the hands, like I said, some features of the hands change and some features don't. So you look at the permanent features, they're always there. So you can look, those are the ones that are most important to look at, because that's how you can work out what someone does, because and you can give a vocational advice to a 19, 20-year-old and tell them to go and do this course or that course and go and train to be this. They've
right.
got their whole life ahead of them, so you can actually give them career guidance on that, because
Yeah, yeah.
that's why you look at the features of the hand that don't change, because they're going to be there all their life, but
Mhm.
they're also the one that shows the skills and abilities. The fingerprint patterns and the palmar skin patterns, the ridges form patterns in the palm as well, those show those skins and those skills and abilities. So that's why I prioritize the things in the hands that don't change, because they're going to be with that person all their life. And
It's
they're
almost
like our
their
skills, they're
talents
like our
and their
gifts.
bliss kind of thing. Their talents and their bliss. This is what they're drawn to. Yeah.
Absolutely, exactly right. And they're like, I mean, it's a good way to think of them is kind of like spiritual gifts.
Mhm.
It's what you've kind of, the talent you've been brought into, you've got this life. You
Right.
don't know why you got this talent, you just had it.
Yeah. Yeah.
A very good friend of mine, she was a medical doctor for her and worked in medicine for most of her adult life. And then she suddenly decided she wanted to do painting. And when I met her, I looked at her hands. I said, "Wow, you got this amazing pattern which says you're an incredible artist."
Yeah.
And she said, "I've always wanted to be an artist," and she was never encouraged to, because of life circumstances. And now
Right.
that's all she does all the time is paint. So
Oh, wow.
it's kind
Is
of
she
like
any
she's sort of
good?
found her
Is she
found
any
her
good?
calling, but it took her 45 years. It's like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
we can. I said we could have cut. If you come and talk to me when you're 20, I could have said, get
But
into
is she
painting
any
now.
good?
So
Is she any
she's
good?
brilliant. Yeah,
Is she?
she's absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant. She's
So
incredible.
there
Yeah,
is
she's for
actual
someone who's not
talent there.
someone who's untrained. Her artwork is extraordinary
Right.
because she's naturally talented, because she's got
Right.
this pattern that shows this natural
So
talent.
it's not just
It's a
desire.
God-given gift, if you like.
Yeah. So it's not just desire, it's desire and talent.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, or gifts. I think that's a good way to put it. I mean,
Yeah.
life is a gift. Life is a gift. We are born with a gift, and we have this energy of the universe coming through us, and we
Mhm.
have a choice about how we articulate and express that. And we should do so with joy, and we should do so in a way that expresses what we are, and bring joy and bliss to ourselves and the people around us. And we don't live in a world that encourages that. We live in a world that wants to exploit and extract
Right.
and
Mold.
demand that we work for the man.
Mold.
So we have a
Yeah.
problem economically, but
Yeah.
I think we are all, if you like, souls trying to express ourselves in the world. And the hand can, if we understand the patterns of the hand, it tells us what's the best way that you should express yourself. And we translate that in terms of like what job you should do or what career you should
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's
that's the
where we
active hand.
spend most of our time.
Absolutely. And so
Yeah.
if your work isn't what you love, then something isn't right, to quote
Yeah.
David Byrne. So, but that's the active hand. The passive hand,
Mhm.
on the other hand, haha, on the other hand, the passive hand is more about where you've come from.
Uh-huh.
So the active hand's kind of in front, the passive hand's behind. What we've noticed in the passive hand is the passive hand shows a lot of things that happened to your parents and your grandparents. So you're as a child, you're born into an environment which is the environment of your family.
Right.
So what we're seeing is when you look at the passive hand, you're seeing things in the passive hand that happened to your mother or your grandmother, for example.
That happened to
So I
her.
did a hand reading.
that actually
Sorry?
that happened to
Yeah.
him,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
is it just
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
talents?
So I did a hand reading last week of a woman, and I could see the effects of her grandmother on her mother
Mm-hmm.
and this is the granddaughter's hand. I wasn't looking at the grandmother, I wasn't looking at
Right.
the mother's hand. The passive hand shows the psychological patternings that of the mother as it's the environment that's affecting the young woman. But I could see in that the negative effects of the grandmother on the mother.
Wow.
So one of the things that the passive hand shows is intergenerational trauma. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the sort of legacy of effects that have come down through the generations, that seems to reside in the passive hand. And the passive hand, if you like, it's the context, it's the background, it's the family hand in the sense as that the family is the context and background for your life.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're looking at when we're looking at that, we're looking at what those impacts are and how they impact you as a child. I mean, to give a very strong and powerful example, I mean, sexual abuse of women, you know, is rife, and sexual abuse of women is often intergenerational. That kind of trauma, you know, is
Right.
often happened through the generations, and you can see sexual abuse, or you can see the effects of sexual abuse in the patterns of the hand.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's in the active hand, it happened to that person. If it's in the
Oh,
passive hand, it didn't, and not in the active hand, it didn't happen to that person, but it happened to their mother.
wow.
So you might have a family where there's a history of sexual abuse and it stopped at that generation and didn't get passed down through the generations. In which case, you'll see it in the passive hand and not in the active hand.
Now
So that's a good
that
one.
person's child, will they still have the grandmother, great grandmother? At what point does it not show up, or has it gone away?
Well, we
Because
don't know. All we know is what we know is the background. We're speculating. We're
right.
making inferences. You know, we're kind of trying to work that out. But I'm just giving you an example of something that you
Yeah.
can see in the passive hand. You know, sexual abuse of the mother, which didn't happen to the person,
Mm-hmm.
because you know. So you can see that, and it's that's really quite telling. Now, we were talking earlier on about um, how different periods of history look at the hand a
Right.
different way. This is a really modern way of looking at the hand, and of course it is because it's a very modern conversation that we're having now to talk about childhood trauma. That's really the last five to
Yeah.
10 years with
Yeah.
people like Dr. Gabor Mate. I mean, it's interesting because I mean, I worked all this out 30 years ago in the 1990s about childhood trauma and sexual abuse and stuff. And I kind of had an inkling about it, but we didn't have the language to describe it then as
Mhm.
we have now. So it's actually easier to have those conversations now because people are more open to talk about it. You and I
Right.
are both old enough to know that sexual abuse was happening in the 1950s and the 1960s, and you
Yeah.
know there were naughty uncles that you kept away from, and but nobody talked about it. It wasn't, you know, it was the problem you just had to put up with and try and get away from in some kind of way. But
What goes
and
on
it's only been
inside
in
the
modern
house
times.
stays in. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's in and all the abuse that's happened in Catholic churches in
Oh
Ireland or
my
in
God.
institutional
Yeah.
care all over the world, you know, all those things were going on in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and nobody talked about it. And there's all these
Mhm.
hundreds of thousands of children who were abused then, who've been traumatized for the rest of their lives.
And
That kind of
apparently, what
traumatic
you're saying,
experience is what shows up in the hand.
the trauma of their lives then is showing up in the non-dominant hand of their
No,
offspring.
if it's in there, if it's in their life, it'll be in their dominant hand.
No, but I mean for their children, let's say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For their
And then it'll
children,
be
yeah,
in
their children, yeah,
non-dominant.
exactly. Yeah,
And
exactly.
how
You got it.
long their grandchildren will it be in the non-dominant hand too? How long does that go on?
I don't know. We haven't done those studies. You know, I mean, it would be brilliant to do that, but you'd have to live a very long time to get the
Well,
grandparents,
yeah,
the parents, and the children's handprints to do that kind of longitudinal study like that. But in theory, look, in theory, that's possible to do, and that's kind of what I'm interested. I'm interested in an empiric basis for hand reading, and I want hand reading that actually works. It isn't grounded in some metaphysical theory about God, isn't this grounded in some metaphysical theory based on astrology or occultism. And I want a hand reading system that actually is grounded in human experience and can be tested and can be verified or denied. And that's the virtue of the book that I've written, the Palmistry of Fingerprints pattern, because it's based upon things that have a scientific basis. It's based on fingerprints that everybody already knows your fingerprints are unique and are descriptors of your individuality.
Mhm.
And we also know that we can assess those from the point of view of personality. We can assess those points from medical things, and we can find those things out. And when I wrote the book, I did a lot of research at the time. But as I said, I've given that book to 100 people, and some of those people have been using that book for 30 years. It's been road tested, been tried out,
Right.
and
Right.
that's the book I've written is essentially it gives you a guide to how to identify your fingerprint patterns
Mhm.
and then what does it mean? Because there are seven different fingerprint patterns, but there are five different digits. So what they mean depends on which finger they're on. And
Right.
so whichever finger the fingerprint's on, it'll have a slightly different significance according to that. So in the book, I write about the different fingerprint patterns and then I explain how they're likely to manifest in people's lives depending on which finger the fingerprint pattern is on.
Now
And that's so people can read the book and kind of
I have to
self-diagnose if you
ask
like.
about the medical. And is anybody applying this to medical diagnosis? You like your friend who was an
Yeah.
MD, did she apply it?
No, she didn't in her case, but two things I'll tell you straight away.
Mhm.
I mean, the answer to your question is yes. In the 1960s and 1970s in the UK, there was a centre called the Kennedy Galton Centre, run by a chap called Lionel Penrose.
Mhm.
He was doing genetic screening of parents to establish whether or not they were going to produce a Down syndrome child. By
Mhm.
looking at the handprints of the parents, he was able to statistically evaluate the likelihood of them giving birth to a Down syndrome child or not. So that was a clinic that people paid hundreds of dollars to go to in the 1960s and 1970s to go and have this kind of. This is before amniocentesis tests and the kind of tests they do now. So those tests have been supplanted. So that, I mean, the point is that that knowledge was widely accepted at that time. And how we know that, I mentioned before about the simian line, about the simian line
Right.
formation going across, instead of the two transverse creases, the single transverse crease. Every midwife and every nurse knows that about the simian line. If you ask anybody who's in those industries, you say, "Do you know what a simian line is?" They'll go, "Yeah." Because what they do want, they're trained to look at it. Because it's particularly midwives, so a newborn child, a newborn infant, one, they do all the little body tests and they test the limbs and they weigh the baby and they clean it all up.
Mhm.
They also quickly look at the hand to see if the child's got a simian line. If the child's got a simian line, they flag it and then they go off and that child is then taken for further tests to see if it is in fact got Down syndrome. So it's part of the medical training literature for
Wow.
nurses and midwives. So that's how it kind of embedded that information is. So, and medical doctors look at the fingernails. They've always been interested in the fingernails are very important from a medical health diagnostic point of view. So there
Mhm.
are features in that the color of the hand can change as well. According, jaundice will affect it, or pulmonary conditions, heart conditions will affect the color of the hands. So there's a whole body of medical literature about the hand and what the hand shows in terms of symptoms of other diseases. The hand kind of reflects the systemic diseases that can occur within the body. So there's a lot of things that can be done within the medical profession for that. And there was a guy called Noel Jaquin in the 1920s and 30s who was a very important pioneer in the palmistry of fingerprints. And he detected how the skin ridges of the palm changed by terms of bacterial infection or conditions like malaria.
Uh-huh.
So that information is there. I mean, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what they're actually using, but could they use it? Yes, they could. Has it been established? Yes, it has. Is it widely known? Indeed, it is. So um, there's the hand is an absolutely incredible diagnostic tool in lots of different ways at a physical level, an emotional level, a psychological level, and a spiritual level. It's really, the hand is the kind of expresser of who and what we are at all those different levels.
Right. Right. Wow. Are you going to have an app on this? Where I
Well,
can
that's funny.
use
You should.
my iPhone and put my finger on there and say, well, you say it's not your future, but if I can read medical, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Well, in fact, it's funny you should ask. I'm actually in consultation with two people right now about developing an app for it. So there will be something, no doubt, in due course. But the fingerprints, but again, you see, the fingerprint, I mean, the fingerprints are interesting because they're easy to identify,
Uh-huh.
and they also, we have the technology to scan them. When I wrote the book in 1991, we didn't even have the internet.
Right.
So, like
Yeah.
I mean, people were talking about, oh, we could scan this and we could analyze this and put it all in the computer. It's like, oh God, it seems like so much hard work. Computers hardly worked in those days, and they didn't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
graphical user
And
interfaces,
they
and
were
we didn't have the
used.
internet.
I
So
mean, they were
they
used.
were
They
totally
were
new.
room
They
size.
had
Yeah.
green screens. It was
Yeah.
all code.
Right.
So the technology is kind of caught up with the need. So yeah, I'm in talks with some people about that idea, and I think it will probably something that will evolve out of the work because there's that's the reason for writing the book, The Palmistry of Fingerprint Patterns, is to make it accessible to people. Would you like me to talk a little bit about? I can tell you a little bit more about what's in the book if you want, and I could even
Yeah.
show you the
Yeah.
cover.
No, it'd be great. But before we go on, so let's say if I had a baby born and they look at her fingerprints and they see cancer in there, is she
No,
going to?
you can't see cancer from the fingerprints. You see dispositions to particular disease conditions to do with the
Okay.
nervous system, digestive system, and the vascular system or heart. Primarily those three.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the
So she's not guessing.
cancerous conditions are degenerative diseases. So you've got there will be things that show that the cancer metastasizing in the body as a part of that degeneration. The fingerprints especially show which body system has got a weakness. So
Mhm.
you might, so it might show that because you might have arched fingerprint patterns that might show more the tendency that if you're going to get cancer, it's going to affect you in the intestines.
Okay.
I've got the world, so if I'm going to get ill, it's going to affect me in the vascular system, in the heart.
I got
And
you.
if you've
So
got loops,
where
it's going to affect
your
you in the
weak
nervous system.
systems are.
It's like showing your weak points. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
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 it's
yeah.
not showing what is, it's showing your weak points. So
Hmm.
it's what you're discipline. I mean, a famous story on that, which I tell often. It's about my mum. Bless her. She, in about 1991, she said to me, she asked me to read her hands, and I went, okay, I will.
Yeah.
And so I took her handprints and I did a hand reading for her. So I was what? I was about 29, 30 years of age at that point, and she was about, I don't know, 55 or something. And she said, I said, oh well, you've got a very long index finger, you're a great leader, and you've got a long hairline, you're very intelligent, you can write books, you're a good communicator. And she said, yes, I know all about that. I know all about that. Tell me something I don't know. Tell me about my future. So I said, Mum, you can't tell the future in the hand. I've told you that before. You can't do. She
Yeah.
said, oh, go on. And I went, okay, you've got 10 loop fingerprint patterns, Mum. You're going to get Alzheimer's when you're older. Oh, I didn't want to know that. And and in fact, she did get Alzheimer's when she was
Well,
older, and that's
that's
the last
that's a
four years.
scary thing to know
Yeah, yeah.
because there's
And that
really not a
and
whole lot you can do about it.
well, I think there are. I mean, they're now talking about Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, so I think diet's a very important part of that process. But
Hmm.
the point is, she had a fingerprint pattern that gave her a disposition to that, and there are other antecedent conditions that triggered that, and her diet and her exercise levels and so on and so forth would play a part in exacerbating the conditions that give rise to that. So it's about self-knowledge, as if it's the Oracle at Delphi. Know thyself. Know
You
who
know where
you are,
mine went?
and if you know who you are, you can make better decisions about how you're going to live your life.
Yeah.
That's the whole
But you
point.
know where my mind went? And this is terrible, being American and being in the insurance, under the insurance empire we're under. My next thought was, oh my God, this information can't get out because we would have insurance companies refuse to insure you, you know?
Yeah, well, maybe,
Oh
but
yeah,
there'd have to be a lot. There'd
here,
have to be a lot. There'd
definitely.
have to be a lot more research work done for them to be sure about it. I think. I think we've got more concerns with rising sea levels. If I think you've got to be more concerned about if you live in Florida and about the rising sea levels. That's probably more important for people than that. I
You
think
know
that'll
what? I
happen.
think I'm more
That'll happen before.
concerned about the
That'll happen before we
insurance
get the
company.
medical stuff. So.
Yeah. Not insuring me, just saying, You've got the propensity, we don't insure you." Yeah, it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's a whole different mindset. But tell
Yeah,
me
yeah, yeah.
what
But
else
I
is
mean, but there's not, but that's a fact. I mean, we have each of us have propensities to certain things. I mean, we
right.
talked about it earlier on, about you have a propensity to that because your parents died of particular disease or have particular illnesses. You have, if there's a history, it's a family history of pneumonia and tuberculosis in your family, you've probably got a weaker
Right.
lung. It's like just genetically, just born with that.
But you
So
know
what are you
what's
going to do
odd?
about it?
You go back 100 years and you don't have the history of cancer, and now
Yeah,
cancer's
but you go back 100 years, and basically 6 out of 11 children would die before the age of 3.
yeah, but a
So
lot of that was
it's I
no
mean, and
antibiotic.
life expectancy was much
Right.
lower. So we're getting cancer now because partly because people are living longer. When if everybody died at age 30, you probably have very low cancer rates. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like it's a product of that. It's like, and if you look at medieval Europe, I mean, everybody died of the plague because
Oh yeah.
there was basically the Black Plague came to Europe every summer pretty much for 150 years. So that was, life was nasty, brutal, and short. Now just life is nasty, brutal, and a bit longer. That's that's how I see it.
Actually,
But
actually, if you walk through graveyards 150, 200 years ago, I was an outside sales rep in New York City, so I'd walk through graveyards on downtime, and a lot of people lived well into their 80s. If you
yeah,
lived
some
through
people do.
childhood,
But
you were alive.
anyone who's got a gravestone, or anyone's got a gravestone who's got enough money to put a gravestone.
Right, right. That's the other
The
thing. Yeah.
people who live shortest lives are the poor people, and
Hmm.
you might not even know who they were, and they may
Right.
be buried in a mass, and they may be buried in mass graves.
But
And then
antibacterial.
when you get pandemics like the pneumonia outbreaks after 1918,
Right.
after the First World War, you got
Yeah.
mass deaths of people. The millions of people after the Second World War who died but probably didn't have a grave at all. So
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't overgeneralize from that because there would, gravestones are for rich people. You have to pay for a gravestone. You
Hmm.
can't have a gravestone if
Right.
you don't have enough money. And
Yeah.
most of the people who die of horrible diseases and die young are usually poor people, so
True.
don't have the money for that.
So, what else is in your book you'd like to tell us about?
All right, which I can bring up on screen if you like, and we can have a quick look at it. Um,
Bring up what?
so,
Go ahead.
my book, it's called The Palmistry of
Oh,
Fingerprint
yeah.
Patterns.
I saw this before. I wanted to ask you about John Lennon.
Ah, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
So this is my book. It's yeah, the secret patterns hidden in your fingers and palms.
Right.
And basically it's got I'm looking at the wrong one. Basically it's got I'm gonna find there we go. That's all my there we go. So this is the contents of it. Basically, I just talk about the history of hand reading. I talk about
Uh-huh.
the anthropology of fingerprint patterns. I talk about the different types of fingerprint patterns. We look at the psychological significance of the fingerprint patterns and what it means for each fingerprint pattern on each finger. And then we also look at the patterns that you get in the palm as well. So it's important to understand you don't just have fingerprint patterns on your fingers, you also have them in your palm.
Right.
And you actually have them on your toes as well. I don't do
Do
toes
you
and toe
really?
prints, but you actually do have. Yeah, next time in your bath, check out your toes.
I,
You've got the skin
I'll
ridges that you
definitely
get
take
on
a
your
look.
hands, you also get them on your feet. Yeah.
So when you say toes,
And
on the
I
bottom of your toes, like almost like
Yeah,
fingerprint,
yeah.
toe prints.
Yeah, they're exactly like your toe prints exactly like fingerprints, and on the palm, on the soles of your feet as well. It's like the skin on your
Wow.
palm. If you feel
Yeah.
the skin in your palm, you can feel it's quite rigid. There are palmar dermatoglyphics and plantar dermatoglyphics. There are medical conditions that are shown by the fingerprint patterns, and I've also included sections on fingerprints and your personal identity and fingerprints and your karmic path. So
Right. I see that.
because I think the fingerprint patterns are kind of a function of the sort of karmic tendencies that we have. When you understand your fingerprint patterns, you understand something of the sort of uh, your life path choices in your life. But
What
I've
you,
also included
yeah.
some analyses of some famous handprints.
Right.
So Jimi Hendrix,
Hmm.
John Lennon, and Malcolm X as well. I just took a
Right.
random selection of a few very well-known people. What's interesting about famous people is the more interesting and unusual and different that person is, what we see is they have interesting, different, and unusual fingerprint patterns. And there's a guy in America called Andrew Washington. He's based in New York, who's been doing this study. independently of me for the last 45 years, and he has access to the FBI database of fingerprints, and he analyzes fingerprints purely from a statistical point of view. And what
Hmm.
he's noticed is that exceptional people have exceptionally rare fingerprint patterns,
They
and John
really
Lennon
do.
is one of those people.
Yeah.
He
Wow.
has, he has, you know, I mean, we all know that he's an exceptional songwriter. He was an exceptional, had a lot of strong political views, and all our lives have been deeply enriched by his musical collaboration with Paul
Hmm.
McCartney. And he has an incredibly rare fingerprint pattern on the index finger of his right hand, whereas Jimi Hendrix has an incredibly rare fingerprint pattern on the index finger of his left hand,
Is
because of
that
course
his
Jimi Hendrix was
dominant?
left-handed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's left. Jimi Hendrix is left-handed, so it's the dominant fingerprint on the index finger of the
Hmm.
dominant hand is the thing that basically describes what's particularly unique about each individual. So I've done some kind of assessments of the fingerprints of these people because they are unusual and extraordinary. It's the same thing with Malcolm X. He's actually got two extremely rare fingerprint patterns that you almost never ever see on anybody.
Really?
Um, yeah, it's called a radial Newton's loop, which is a bit of a technical mouthful, but it's the basically the principle is the same. You know, the fingerprint patterns show us our uniqueness as individuals, and the more rare the fingerprint pattern, the more unique we are. You know, and so if we can describe the uniqueness of the fingerprint pattern, we're going to describe that uniqueness. As I mentioned, we can look at the sort of patterns of your comma, because these patterns are so foundational to our life experience. They are really kind of guide our choices in life. We kind of dispose us to particular kinds of ways of being in the world. So you basically you work out what kind of fingerprint pattern you've got, and work out the dominant fingerprint pattern, and that will show you kind of what your primary instincts, your primary motivations, and your primary drives are, and therefore how to find your bliss in life, because you will be happy in your life when you're kind of fulfilling kind of the essence of your nature. And the
Right.
fingerprint patterns really show that kind of essential qualities of who we are.
So now,
So,
first, how did you get John Lennon's fingerprints? Are they published?
oh well, John Lennon's fingerprints. John Lennon applied to become a citizen of the United States, so he had to submit his fingerprint
Oh,
patterns
okay.
to the immigration department. This guy Andreas Washington got them, and I liaised with him, and he gave them to me.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, and Jimi Hendrix served in the army, so his records are a
Okay.
matter of public
Yeah.
record. And same thing for Malcolm X was in prison, so his was as well.
Yeah. I
So
knew where his
all
came
these
from. Yeah.
yeah. Um, so yeah, so they kind of that's how I mean they are public documents, you know, in that sense, so
Mhm.
they are accessible.
Now, John Lennon's karmic fingerprints, what were they?
Well, that's a very short question with an extraordinarily long answer and probably a bit too complicated to answer. But
Yeah.
I will answer that in one particular. I'll answer that very specifically in one particular way, because he had what's known as the world fingerprint pattern. He had a fingerprint pattern that basically looks like a spiral. He
Hmm.
had quite a lot of those, and the spiral pattern shows somebody who's a rebel, somebody who wants to do things differently, someone who doesn't fit in, someone who's a bit of an iconoclast. But what he had, particularly where that whirl was, he had it on his middle finger of both hands. So if you
Hmm.
look at the here, you can see he's got the whirl. He's got one, two, three, four, five whirl fingerprint patterns, but on both of his middle fingers, he's got a whirl on both of his middle fingers.
Hmm.
And the middle finger's to do with our political views and our relationship to culture and authority. And the whirl on the middle finger always shows someone who's essentially a rebel, a political outlier, someone who challenges the status quo. And I think it's really interesting to we always think of John Lennon as a musician, but I think actually he was more of a political activist than he was a musician. And that's what's really, I think, is shown by the fingerprint patterns. You
Wow.
know, he came from a poor part of Liverpool in the United Kingdom, but if you think about Imagine or songs like Give Peace a Chance,
Hmm.
his message, particularly after he left the Beatles, was basically very strongly politically motivated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's an important part of it. But
Now,
I discuss all that in the book. That's a whole chapter in the book about the famous people in the book.
oh, okay.
You can get the book from Amazon.com. It's published on the 27th of January.
You can pre-order.
If you get this book, you'll basically discover the significance of the sort of driving forces in your own life. It's an incredibly easy book to read. It's people have told me they're fascinated by it. They can't put it down when they start reading it.
And you do
So even
your
someone who
own
doesn't
fingerprints?
really know anything about hand reading, it's designed so that you can look at your own fingerprint patterns and work out what they are. And
Hmm.
as I say, then I explain the significance of all of those, and then you better look at your handprints of your partner or your friends, and better work them out as well. So the fingerprint patterns are kind of, because they don't change and because they are fundamental to who we are, they are incredibly powerful descriptors of what it is to be the unique individual that we are. They show our uniqueness in so many ways, and if we can understand that, and if we can make our life resonate with that, then our lives are going to be much, much more fulfilling and much more an expression of our kind of soul's urge to manifest into the world.
Hmm. Okay, I've got one quick question, then I'll let you go. And the quick question, I don't think you can answer maybe. Did you know that John Lennon's life would be cut that short? Or that doesn't show up?
No, no, I mean, I've actually got a copy of his handprints as well. And remember, what you've just asked me there is a question that comes from 13th century chiromancy.
Right,
How
right,
long am
right.
I
I
going
had to
to
ask
live?
them.
So you've asked me a question. I just want to say to you, Barbara, you've asked me a question that's 600 years out of date.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that whole approach to hand reading is
Hmm.
superstitious. It's erroneous. You cannot see how long someone's going to live from the hand. You can see their character, their potentials, their skill sets, their emotional dispositions, their creative abilities. You can see in John Lennon's hand, he's an artist, he's a musician. That's very obvious to see from the hand. He's got
Right,
many characteristics that are common in the hands of artists and musicians. You can see that he's intellectual and clever and wordy. But you absolutely can't see that he's going to be
and
killed
it
in
wouldn't have been part
1980
of
as he
it.
was.
It wouldn't
No,
have been part of the
that
karma.
just stuff isn't in the hand at all. It never
Right,
was.
right.
That's a product of the fear and the superstition of the 13th century, when they were
Hmm.
very concerned about how they were going to die and how long they were going to live, because life was nasty, brutal, and short, and they were
Right,
lucky if they made it past their 30th birthday, or didn't get called to go to war because their king said, right, we're going to go and fight the infidel now, or just get fall off a horse and die because they fell off a horse, or die in childbirth, as I mentioned
yeah,
earlier on. So
yeah.
that preoccupation with how long am I going to live, and death is a product of that 13th century viewpoint on hands, which we consider to be superstitious and outdated, and for which there is no empiric basis.
Right.
So
So let me end it
yeah,
with a
yeah.
dumb question. So,
Oh,
but
that's great. No, it's all about, it's all about the facts about the myths, and that's one of the
yeah,
myths.
yeah.
And I think it's much more useful to know that your skills and abilities and what you could do with your
Mhm.
life, than that's the answer to that sort of question. I think it's much more useful. So
Are
we're
you?
trying to here to help people live fulfilling lives, and there's a whole team of us around the world in different countries, in the States, in the United Kingdom, in New Zealand, where I am, and I'm training people currently in Romania and
Are
Russia,
you still
and
teaching courses?
Norway.
And
Yeah, I teach courses as well. So the International Hand Reading Association, we run courses. Maybe I'll just put up the screen which shows all the links are. Then people can take a
okay.
screenshot of that if they want. Um, because yeah, so that's where you can find me online.
Oh, that's
My
perfect.
website, Handreading NZ. I'm on Facebook as Handreading NZ and Instagram.
Mhm.
The YouTube channel is at Master Handreader. That's probably the best place for people to go because there's lots of good videos on there, and people can
Right.
subscribe to that and get all the updates from that. But the International Handreading Association is the international organization I've set up with some colleagues to to teach handreading as a serious study bereft of superstition, and to as an empirical study into human psychology, behavior, and to understand how and what we are, and how we can lead better lives that are more fulfilling. I mean, I think everybody wants that, so we're trying our
True.
best to do what we can
Do
with
you
our lives.
work with anybody individually anymore, or just mostly through teaching and writing?
No, I mean, people come to me for hand reading consultations, and they
They
can do
do.
that by Zoom as well. So if people are
Yeah.
really interested in having hand reading, they can just send me an email, and
Okay,
we can
good.
set up a hand reading appointment by do it online, or they can come to New Zealand and do it in person if they like. So that would be another
Yeah.
option.
You could be a
But yeah,
destination.
that'll be a trip of the lifetime, wouldn't it? Really. So
It really
but
would. Great excuse for New Zealand. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show. I've really enjoyed it. It's been enlightening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Barb. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you today, and
Great.
You're welcome to invite me back anytime. This is my first book in a series. There's going to be more books coming out.
Oh, good.
My next book's going to be called The Palmistry of the Lines. So we're going to the lines a bit more in that one. But this one is The Palmistry of Fingerprints. It's
Yeah,
out on the 27th of January. You can order it from Amazon.com. It'll blow your mind and change your life because you know your life is literally in your hands.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. Bye-bye.